Thank you everyone for joining our Expert User webinar series for the NetSuite OpenAir product. Welcome to 2015. This is our first webinar for 2015, and we have a great lineup set up for the rest of the year as well, already on our website, so feel free to take a look at those. But today we're going to focus on user administration. And I thought what I would do is just to let you know, for those of you who are new to TopStep or maybe joining us for the first time, we always like to let you guys know what's going on in the community. And right away in February, we're going to start up our local user groups. We have 2 locations identified for February. February 13th, there's going to be one in Dallas. Mentor Graphics has graciously agreed to host this one, so we'll be doing it on February 13th. It's lunch from 11 to 2. And then we're going to do another one in the UK. We haven't got a location yet. We're still working with some customers for potential locations, so stay tuned, any of you that happens to be over the pond. Our webinar series is going to continue next month with the hot topic of resource management. That was a pretty big topic throughout 2014 with all the feature functionality that got launched, and we're going to continue talking about that in the February timeframe. And those of you who have followed us in the past, we are going to start our OpenAir tips again. 2014 we focused on some other areas, but we're going to go back to what we really love doing, which is giving you guys advice and helpful hints and tips and tricks on how to interact with the OpenAir system. So we'll be putting those on our OpenAir users group LinkedIn site, as well as tweeting those out through TopStep tweets. So if you want to follow us, you won't miss a thing. And many of you probably already got this email from NetSuite, but NetSuite registration is open. Early bird registration is open right now, and this year TopStep will be a silver sponsor. We're even going to have a smoothie machine one day, so definitely stop by. We look forward to seeing you. And this is in the May 5 through 7 time frame. So let's go ahead and get started with the topics for today, though. So we're going to talk about user administration. And what does user administration mean? It doesn't mean just setting up users. There's things you can do to take advantage of user administration, such as a cost savings to the company. How does user administration translate to cost savings? Making sure that you don't have to buy extra licenses, or you're effectively using the licenses that you have purchased already from the NetSuite company. Accurate invoicing, we'll get into how all of these are impacted, but just making sure users are set up right will make sure your reports are correct, the metrics that you're getting are correct, that people have the right access based on how they're set up or what permissions they've been given. User administration helps support compliance, such as timesheet submissions and making sure people are compliant with the timesheet process. And people understand what their targets are, what their goals are, and what their benefits are, such as PTO balances or leave balances. So user administration, there are some tips on how to update different parts of a user administration. User accounts, as you may know, has a lot of different components to it. Not only just your username and your role. There's a lot of pieces, parts to the user record in the system, so there's a lot of different ways to update that data, and we're going to go through what the approaches are in each of these key maintenance areas for user administration. And one thing that I would like to make sure that you leave with is an understanding of just because a feature sounds good may not mean it's the best fit for your organization, because with any feature, with any functionality comes a level of maintenance that has to occur, and if you fall behind on maintenance, then the feature may actually be a hindrance versus a help. So I'll try to highlight those as we go through the different areas of user administration and feature functionality that you may be using or considering to use. So when you set up users in the system, it goes beyond just creating a user and then updating fields, for example, because there's some things that you may have an impact based on processes or reports or metrics or notifications. So some examples are, what if you change the manager on a person? If you change a manager on a person, that does not dynamically reroute timesheets, for example, that are waiting for approval. So you have to consider things that may be in flight that you want to make sure they get routed to the right person, for example. For those of you who are using project hierarchies and the feature that gives people permission to projects based on access that you've defined in their project record, by changing the project hierarchy or by changing a user's project access, you could actually give them access to projects that maybe they're not supposed to have access to, or maybe they need access to, but they haven't because they're missing a piece of information. Same thing for the user hierarchy. User hierarchy is another thing that you can use to control data access. So simply changing the value in a field may have a ripple effect as to who can see resources, what reports are impacted, what projects may be available, and so forth. Job code. One of the nice features of OpenAir is the ability to track a job code by person, so you can do sort of that FTE by job code. But also the fact that you're changing a person's job code may actually impact how that person is billed out on the project. And what you never want is a client to be surprised from an invoice that you've generated because you didn't realize that changing a job code from consultant to senior consultant was going to bump up their bill rate from $125 to $250. So being aware of the ripple effect of changing things like this and how these features or fields are used throughout the application. And even something as simple as changing departments. There are specific department setups and department controls in the system, such as timesheet alerts. So if you have specific timesheet alerts set up to send emails to certain departments, the fact that you've changed a person from one department to another means they may no longer get an alert, or they may get a different alert, and just understanding how you've set the system up and why department change would impact things like that. The cost center is one we're going to spend a little more time on the cost center, but changing a person's cost center changes how cost is associated to objects in the system, and we'll go through sort of what the cost center functionality is in OpenAir, how you can use it and control it on the user record versus the project record, and what some customers will do to work around some of the standard ways that a cost center actually exists in the system. So what are the ways to update the users? Well, the most obvious way to update a user is manually. Just open up that record under the administration module and make the changes that you need, provided you have the permission to edit those users. There are some quick update features, though, and many of you know about the bulk user wizard. If you're not familiar with the bulk user wizard, this functionality is available on your dashboard or your home page under a tile called Wizards. And it's the bulk user wizard change. The thing about the bulk user change wizard is that it can actually copy many values from a single source person. So you use one person as sort of your template, and you can copy values over to other people just by selecting, let's say, for example, we're going to change, everyone's going to start working on Mondays instead of Sundays, for example. And you go to the next page and you select the users that are impacted by that. So it gives you a nice way to copy groups, group information. So you can do it by department, you can do it by user, across users within the user interface, right? Nice and simple. But not everything is in here. Okay, not every single field that is available on the user form or features available on the user account, like target utilization, for example, those aren't available on the bulk user wizard. So unfortunately, there are limitations to what this wizard can actually do for you. So I'm just going to go through as we talk about the different areas to kind of keep an eye on what you can use the wizard for and what you'll have to use other means to update the information. The integration manager, if you're not familiar with this, you may also know this as OpenAir Connect. This is the database integration tool. Flat file integrations are built often with it. When your system was deployed, the people who deployed your system used it to populate data probably initially, and it's really a data import, data extract type file mapping tool. So the integration manager is another way to upload data. However, this tool does require the fact that you have to have a license for it. So it's not an individual license, it's a company license. Some of you already have integrations with this product, so you definitely have access to it already. And some training on how to use the tool, because the tool is a very powerful tool. It does actually go around some of the business controls and checks and balances that may be in place with the user interface. It kind of goes behind the scenes and touches the database directly. So you do need some education before you attempt to use the Integration Manager, especially with importing data, because above all things, you do not want to mess up your database just to save yourself 15 minutes of updating things manually. Okay. And I'm probably exaggerating with the 15 minutes. I'm sure it's much longer, but just know that you need some training before you can use the Integration Manager tool. And finally, this may be something that you may not be aware of, is there are a few features in the system that if you have to update a user or multiple users in a particular area, you can actually go to the feature itself and do that update. Some examples are the hierarchy feature, the department feature, and we'll kind of dip into those so you can see what I mean by going to the feature and directly updating users in both by using the feature itself. So let's go through some examples. So for manager updates, right? So once a year there's a reorganization, or somebody leaves, or somebody else gets hired, or you've sort of changed the structure of the organization, and you are updating the managers on users. So if it's a small number of people, 5, 10 people, manually, it should be fine. You go in, you edit the user record, and you change the user, the name of the user on the manager record. The manager record is part of the bulk user wizard feature, so of course if you have a whole department that has a new manager, you can certainly use the bulk user wizard for that. And of course if you're doing a complete reorganization, new departments, new managers, new everything, Integration Manager of course is probably the most robust, because you can do sort of a fell swoop update of all the managers. However, consider what is impacted when you change that manager. Okay? And primarily what's impacted is anything that's sort of in process. And when I mean by in process or in progress are timesheets that have been submitted that are waiting for a manager's approval, expense reports, anything that has a submission option which you may be routing to the manager of that person for approval, schedule requests, expense reports, maybe it's booking requests or bookings or allocations, whatever you've renamed the scheduling function to. So all of that sort of waiting for that manager to take action. If you have a reorganization, a common question that we get is, well, if I change the manager, doesn't it just reroute stuff automatically? And the answer is no. You have to force the system to reroute it. And the way that you can do that is run an audit report, basically, or an export, and find out what's currently submitted that may need to be rerouted. So I'm going to use timesheets as an example. Go and run a time entry detail report and include the person, their current manager, their current approver, and the timesheet that's submitted, and take a look to see if any of those approvers are the manager that field that you're updating. Okay, so in the example screenshot I have on here, Leia's manager, Shaktai, is holding up this timesheet. So if Shaktai is the one that's going to be changed to Han Solo, this timesheet would have to be rerouted. Now, what's the easiest way to reroute it? Unfortunately, there's really no super easy way. Many of you already know this process, which is proxy in, as in our example here, Shaktai, and reject the timesheet so that you can say it's being rerouted to another manager. Put that as a note. It comes across in the email to the user that the timesheet's being rejected because it's being rerouted to another manager. Update the user's manager then at that point, and then proxy in as the user, Leia, in this situation, and resubmit the timesheet. And it will reevaluate who the manager is, and it'll reroute to the person's manager. So really to reroute things in process, you have to do that proxy, reject, and then resubmit as behalf of the user. If you don't already have proxy set up, this is one of those, if you're an administrator, one thing I'd like to recommend is try to put as many proxies in your proxy table as possible, because eventually you will end up proxying as everyone in the company by fixing something or checking something out or answering help desk tickets. So this timesheet reroute process would be shortened a bit if you already have the proxies in your table. Okay. Now, what about the hierarchy updates? I mentioned something about hierarchy being a direct feature update. There's really sort of two hierarchy items that I see updating or being changed on a potentially regular basis. And for those of you who are not using hierarchies, what a hierarchy feature is is the ability to add structure to OpenAir, okay? Reporting structure primarily. So I'm going to go into global settings, and over here on the organization side, there's something called hierarchies. Now you can put hierarchies on user records, project records, client records, but the ones I'm talking about are specific to project and user. Okay. Now when you set up a project hierarchy, there's a functionality in the system that gives you control over, if you have access to see certain parts of the hierarchy, then you see all projects in that hierarchy. And that's a functionality called project access nodes, which shows up on the user demographic form. If you haven't seen that before, it's actually over here. See if we have it turned on here in my Sandbox account. You see this project level access. This leverages the project hierarchy. So if you've associated projects to certain levels or nodes in the hierarchy, then you can grant people access to those specific projects by using this functionality, this project level access functionality. So the fact that if you change the project access for a person, then they would have access potentially to other projects depending on how you have things controlled. That data access implies filter sets. So there is a functionality that's sort of used hand in hand with this project level access called hierarchy access in filter sets. Okay, and I have a screenshot on the next slide so you can see what that feature looks like. If you don't have hierarchies enabled, if you don't have hierarchies set up, if you don't have the project access node set up, feature enabled, and you don't have the filter set feature enabled, then of course you can skip all of this that I'm talking about. But if you want to control project access by sort of regional ownership, the hierarchy is one of the best ways to do that, and then setting up a project structure so that you can grant people access to parts of the structure simply by using filter sets. Now, how you update this is you can update the users directly, or you can use Integration Manager. For a majority of everything I'm going to talk about, there's always a manual update, and pretty much there's always an Integration Manager update that you can do. However, if we're talking about the user hierarchy is another is something that you can put people into a hierarchy and then grant people access to see everyone that's in my hierarchy. So I'm part of the U.S. organization. I'm allowed to see everyone in the U.S. organization. Again, leveraging something called a filter set, leveraging a functionality called hierarchy, my own hierarchy. And in this case, this is actually something that you can update directly in the hierarchy itself. So this is one of those direct feature update potentials. So if you needed to move people between organization structures, for example, in the hierarchy, you can do that from the hierarchy itself. And if I'll show you again how that looks. If we go into the hierarchy field, if you look at a user hierarchy, this one's pretty simple. It just says US and UK. But if you do something simple like just look at the US node, this is everyone that's in the US node on the right-hand side and everyone in the company on the left-hand side. And so if you wanted to reassign somebody to a different node, you simply would just take them out of the one node and put them in the other node. So you can do it directly from the feature. Okay, and there's only a few features that you can do this kind of stuff with, and hierarchy happens to be one of them. A person can only be in one hierarchy node at a time. Okay. Now, for those of you who may not be aware of the filter set hierarchy relationship, here's an example of a filter set. Filter set is how you control who can see what data in the system. And if you have the features turned on, which are internal switches, you have things such as I can access projects in my hierarchy node, which is that project level access feature. I can access users in my own hierarchy, which is that user hierarchy feature. So this gives you sort of a little bit broader way to control access to projects and users by using hierarchies. Now, job code update. So job codes are basically labor categories. Maybe it's a loose association with titles, but typically it relates to your price list. And in job codes, you can always update them directly or use the Integration Manager. But the thing to consider about job codes is if you change somebody's job code, will that ripple through and impact the way that you bill certain projects. Billing rules can use rate cards or job codes, which rate cards use job codes, to determine the billing rate. For those of you who are using blended rates, this is sort of a no change situation. I change it from one title to another, and it should be fine. Job code to it should be fine, as long as the rate card has all the job codes in it. But if you change somebody from a consultant to a senior consultant, that could potentially change the bill rate for that person. And if the project has been going on for quite some time, the customer should be made aware that A, the person is going to have a different bill rate, or B, you should make an exception and keep that person at a lower bill rate based on agreement with the customer. So things to consider are, when you're going through and you're updating job codes, I'd recommend running an audit of billing rules. There's really two ways to do a billing rule audit. You can run a detailed billing rule report. The thing about the billing rule report, you can't really filter on time-only bill rules. You'll get all the billing rules that you have in the system. So you have to sort of add type as a column and then filter on the spreadsheet that comes out. You can't filter by user either, like who's already gone through the rule that you would need to double check. But you can exclude all the inactive rules. So another thought when you want to do an audit of a billing rule is potentially using a summary report, subtotaling by project, the billing rule of the project, and the user that has been generated or is projected to generate out of the billing rule. Then you can add the same detail fields as you would here in the detail report, and you can add rule and rate card, okay, as a field. You can filter for time-only charges, so you'll only get your time-only billing rule. So you get a much smaller sample of data to kind of have to pour through to make sure that, hey, I should probably call Accenture and let them know that Johnny just got a promotion and we'll be billing him out at a higher bill rate going forward, or set up a special rule that only Johnny is billed out at $125 because even though he's got a promotion, we want to keep the rate the same for him. So there's things that you should take a look at all the projects that the person is on, because what you don't want is a surprise on the client side and them coming back to you saying, well, why am I paying more for this person? I don't control the promotions on your side. Okay. Here's an example of the summary report that I was using as the example here. So basically I was running a company summary report by project, by billing rule, by user, and I pulled the detailed field for the billing rule of the rate card and the rule itself, which would tell me if I'm using a rate card or a job code or a service or a user, for example, to do the billing. And then over here on the right-hand side, just to drive the information, I was using project billing and projected billing, just so I would get the name of the person coming out as well. And then I can filter it by the name of the person. So I filtered on myself at this point in time. If I gave myself a promotion, then I would go through and double check all the rules to make sure I want to make sure projects would be handled appropriately. Department updates. So department updates are another one of those areas that, of course, manually is always an option, Integration Manager. The bulk user wizard, of course, can be used because you can copy people by department, actually, using the wizard or by person. But department is also one of those exception features that if you go inside the department record itself, you can update who's assigned to the department. And if you've never tried that before, going into the department record, so here's my department. Not only can you give the department a name and a department head is not manager, so that's a different field. But if I click into assign users, this is where I can quickly just add people to my department or remove people from my department. So if you have to update 15, 20 people, it might be quicker just to go into the department area here than even using the bulk user change wizard or editing the records. Just go into the department and make those changes because it will respect that and it will update the user record directly based on that. What's impacted if you change a user's department? A common thing that I see set up as a dependency is timesheet alerts. So timesheet alerts can be set up to send only to people who have timesheets required, or specific named people, or people who have an active allocation in the system or booking in the system, or people of a certain department. So if you use department to sort of group it by geography, Moving somebody from the eastern geography to the western geography means they get a different timesheet alert, which of course may come out of a different time zone. So just be aware of that. And of course, many times reports are either subtotaled or filtered by department. Department P&Ls are pretty common in OpenAir. So how would that person reflect in those reports differently by changing their department? Okay, so just be aware of that. And we're going to talk about entity tags, which may be something you want to consider if you're worried about changing somebody from Department A to Department B and maintaining that historical data for Department A. Okay. Cost centers. So for those of you who are using cost centers look like another drop-down, but they do have special functionality in the system. Again, how you update this, you can do it manually. It is available in the bulk user change wizard. It is available for Integration Manager. It does not have a direct feature access, so you have to make a change in one of these three ways. And the impact of changing the cost center impacts how that cost is associated, that person's cost is associated with different objects, depending on how you have the cost center functionality set up. What do I mean by that? So when you define cost centers, you tell OpenAir how to deal with cost centers from a project, from an expense report perspective and a time entry perspective. And what that means is it will look at the objects in the order that you identify to determine where the cost center is pulled and stamped on those cost-related transactions, or revenue in the case of revenue rules. So if you look at the right-hand side for time entry rules, the word project and then user is selected. So what will happen is the cost center field will appear on the project record and it will appear on the user record. And the OpenAir system will look at the project definition first. If there is no value on the project field, it will look to find the cost center on the user record. So you changing the cost center on the user record could potentially change how cost is stamped. Cost centers are stamped on cost-related transactions such as time in this case. If you look at the other side for receipts, there are no values selected for receipts, so cost centers are not associated to expense reports, okay? Which is usually an exception. I usually see project user or just user in this situation. The thing about cost centers are sticky fields. So those of you who have worked with us before, I use the term sticky field a lot. It's a sticky field, which means the value of the field follows the transaction. So if I put a piece of time in the system today, it will stamp that time entry with whatever my cost center is or whatever the project's cost center is at the time of entry. If I change the cost center tomorrow, that original value that I already entered keeps the old value. Okay, so it's a sticky field. The challenge with that is you can't control the date of the cost center. Your only date control is the day that you change it. The minute that you change it and you hit that save record, everything from that point forward will get a different cost center potentially, depending on how you have the configuration of cost center. So you can't go backwards in time to say, okay, but as of last week, I want everything to have cost center X because this person moved into cost center X. I just got the change process, the user, updates from HR. It's a week later, so I want to update all of those old transactions. The only way to do that is to use Integration Manager. Okay, so cost center is a bit of a sensitive field. So what some customers will do is instead of using cost center, which is actually pretty powerful but sensitive, they will use something called entity tags, and we'll talk about those in just a little bit. So speaking of cost centers, there's cost in the system, right? And specifically I'm talking about loaded cost, the hourly cost that OpenAir tracks. And you may be using the loaded cost in a variety of ways. There are up to 3 levels of cost that you can track per person, and those have both current and historical values as options on the user record. So how do you maintain that? How do you quickly maintain cost information on the user record? Well, as everything, there's more than one way to update it. So there's always the manual method. If you have 1 or 2 people that they've gotten a promotion or an off-cycle promotion, you could certainly go and update that cost level and enter a historical value in there. The bulk user wizard allows you to copy cost settings, which is an interesting thing. And so if you have people that have exactly the same cost and exactly the same historical values, you can certainly copy it from person to person. I don't see that very often, but if you do have it, Bulk User Wizard, of course, is usable, and Integration Manager is always an option. However, this user cost feature also has a unique attachment to an advanced report called % Historical Utilization. It only works on the primary cost level, so if you're using one level of cost, it'll work for you. If you're using 3 levels of cost, just to be aware, it only works on the first level. And how it works is, in the advanced reports functionality, you can run a % historical utilization for a defined period. In this example, I've run a historical utilization for the year 2011. And each of these resources came up with 81%, 62%, 39%, 67%, some kind of % utilization. The goal here is that you're using this % utilization to drive what the cost impact, because you're paying them to be full-time. So ideally you're seeing 100, 105, 95, something like that. You're seeing that they've spent more than 40 hours a week. But you run this historical utilization report. And then, while you're looking at the report, if you click on the tips area, which is the little quote bubble, there's a functionality that says, click here to adjust users loaded cost. So this is the automated update feature to adjust the cost table on user records. When you say click here, it comes up and it says, hey, do you want to overwrite anything that might be existing? So you're sort of refining what's already in the record. And if you say yes and run the cost adjustments, what will happen is it will create an entry in the cost table with a date range that aligns with the report. So the report that I ran actually only was up until September 1, 2011. And because my utilization was less than 100%, it adjusted my cost up accordingly to 125. So this process, it's nice, it's automated, but the deal with this whole process is getting this initial report right so that you're adjusting costs correctly. So the utilization, it's not really meant to be like just give me billable utilization. It's meant to be give me the fact that you showed up to work and how many hours of work did you do in the year 2011. You would expect to see at least 100, maybe 105, 110, and then you would be able to do a cost adjustment to lower that person's cost per hour because they work so many hours in the year. Many customers will use this to do sort of quarterly or monthly adjustments based on aligning a person's cost to their salary cost. So a person working a 60-hour week may only get paid for 40 hours, and so you want to reflect the cost more accurately in OpenAir. When I see that process in place, that primary cost level is certainly locked down, so it's limited on who has access to that information to get that refined cost profitability type reports. Okay, but this is one of those features that you may not have been aware of, but it does give you an ability to update historical costs by using functionality in the OpenAir system without just manually typing data in. The current cost is not an option that you can just update without having to do some kind of manual interaction or by using Integration Manager. So the current cost is an exception there. It's really just this historical cost entry that you can take advantage of. So we're in January, and many of you are dealing with this situation right now, which is the PTO balances, carryovers, rollovers, delay of loss. And really here, the key to PTO balances, setting up the PTO or the leave accrual, setting up the leave accrual rules to handle this first part of January. And it happens to many of us just once a year, so you're figuring it out this year, oh, next year we should be able to set it to this and this and this, and if nobody remembers, then next year you get the same situation again. So really consider things like you have a carryover policy, so you can only carry over 40 hours a week, 40 hours into the new year. Anything over 40, you lose. However, typically people will not put their timesheets in for the last week of December until January. So there's a functionality on the rules to keep in mind to make it easier for this whole user administration, user help desk thing. Say, do not expire the hours on your leave accrual rules until so many days later, so maybe 10 days into January. Give people time to get those last timesheets in, and then expire whatever left over. So it'll give the opportunity for timesheets to pull down or draw down from the 2014 values in the system before it does its thing and does the carryover and it does the expiration of anything over the carryover. Another thing to consider is if you do have a carryover policy that's something like you have to use the carryover in the first quarter of the month, make sure, or first quarter of the year, set a grace period of 90 days. So if they don't use it within 90 days, the system will automatically expire. The thing about PTO, it's not so much a user administration thing. It's more understanding how to set this up so that you sort of set it and forget it would be the goal. And the unique thing about the leave accrual rules is if you're using leave accrual, the user record will have the leave accrual tab on it. Okay, so for those of you who are considering using leave accrual, on the user record, there's a leave accrual tab. And the thing about the leave accrual tab is you can set it up so that you're always dealing with seniority changes. So a person gets hired in, and after 4 years, they get 4 weeks of vacation. And after 5 or 10 years, they get 5 weeks of vacation. Set all those rules up. Go out as far as you possibly can. So vacation, 1 to 3 years ends 2017. Vacation 4 to 7 years starts 2017 and goes to, or 2018 and goes to 2020. Vacation 8 to 12 years goes from 2021 to 2025. Go ahead and set it up as far in the future, assuming the person's never leaving the company. Because what that will do is it will prevent you from having to come in here every year and change these dates and change these rules. Okay? The goal is similar to billing rules on projects and revenue recognition rules on projects. Ideally, set it and forget it. So when you set up a user record, set up their leave accrual once, and it should work year after year. Just keep in mind things like human behavior of timesheets for the end of December usually get put in early January, so don't expire stuff on December 31st. Give it a grace period or a delay of loss. And the carryover hours, consider a grace period as your rule set up. Okay. Now I've mentioned entity tags a couple of times in the presentation, and entity tags, basically my layman's terms for entity tags are it's custom drop-down fields that have a date index. So this is something that customers will use to answer the challenges that are presented by using standard functionality such as departments and cost centers. And the reason this is entity tags, you basically define things called tag groups, and each tag group has a set of values. So you can think of a tag group as like a custom drop-down, and the values or the attributes as the values that are in the drop-down. The thing is, when you turn on entity tags, it adds another aspect to the user record, which requires you to, well, ideally, you would set default values of what the current value is of the field, and then you would have a historical table that would have date ranges to identify when the person had a different value at a different time. So if you think in terms of like department, person was in Department A until the end of 2014, and now they're in Department B. If you update the user record from A to B and you run a historical report, it'll look like the person has always been in Department B. That may not be desired, especially from a P&L perspective. So you may consider using entity tags instead. So Department A up until 12/31/14, and now I'm in Department B, that's my current value. So when I run historical reports, I can say, give me everything by tag group, and it'll basically, instead of by department, you would do it by tag group, and it would give me the appropriate information for the person in Department A previously and Department B currently. How you would update that, the only challenge I see with entity tags is the maintenance of them. So this is one of those, consider the maintenance if the feature sounds good to be using. Entity tags are really nice on reports. They reflect through correctly on subtotaling and filtering, and they give you that sort of date index with fields that you don't normally have a date association with. The challenge is that to keep them up to date, you have to either manually edit the user record or you have to use Integration Manager. It's not available in the bulk user change wizard. It's not available as part of a direct feature update. There's no reports that you can run to copy things over. So the management of the data becomes a little bit more time intensive, more administrative in the system. So you really want to consider what should be an entity tag if you want to go down this path of support reporting, and how often it changes. Because if it's changing every week, then I would challenge to let's figure something else out, because it'll become, somebody will just be chained to OpenAir updating the data. If it's something that happens once a quarter, maybe once a year, this is a very nice feature. Or if something, on exception, it's a very nice feature to use. Many of the customers that are using this feature will use it to control utilization reports, to be able to include or exclude people who are no longer with the company or just joined the company mid-year. So you get that, that data control of the person wasn't in the company Q1, so they're not impacting utilization with a 0. Okay. If you're not familiar with entity tags, there are another tab if you turn the feature on, which is something you can turn on yourself in the system. It's an optional feature. When you set up an entity tag, you can set up a series of groups, for in this case employment status. And employment status could be yes, they're employed, and no, they're not employed. So you can say they were not employed from, let me go down here, 1/1/2014 to 12/31/2014. Employment status is no. Okay, and what they would do is if I ran a 2-year utilization report, the person would only contribute to this year's values because last year they were not employed. So I would filter out any values with the value of no on reports. It shows up on reports and summary reports actually. Let me go to the summary report here. And when the summary report shows up and you go down to the filter area, so the subtotals, it'll show up as a subtotal here. User's employment status, so it's got a little bit of a possessive of the object that it's on. And there's also a filter area, which is at the very bottom here, user's employment status. And I could say only give me people who are employed, which means anything with the value no would be excluded for that time range. Okay, so it's a pretty nice feature to use, but it does require maintenance. So you want to pick something that doesn't require that's not very dynamic, that doesn't require an update like every week to make it accurate. Utilization targets. So this is another feature that you can turn on, optional feature you can turn on. And the thing I like about utilization targets is it gives multiple people information that's critical to running a business. So many times if you're working as an executive or manager of a company, you are using utilization targets as a way to budget. If everyone hits their target, here's how much how many billable hours that we'll get. If we have an average bill rate, then we get sort of a known capacity if we just hit utilization numbers. Okay, and in some companies that's part of their comp. People are comped based on hitting certain numbers. So the utilization targets are useful for executives because it gives them an ability to understand what's achievable in the company and how the budget can be supported by that utilization. It's useful for the individual because it gives them something to target, something to visibly see in the system that 75% billability or billable utilization means this many hours for the quarter. Where are you at with your current workload? Do you need to go and find some more billable work, or talk to your manager if there's some kind of exception? So the utilization target feature is not only just one of those just another metric. It actually is a good communication device for executives and individuals on, in general, a key metric that runs the organization. You can update this manually and of course with Integration Manager. It's actually a pretty simplified table. And it's primarily used for utilization reporting. When you set target utilization, it actually calculates another set of values called target work schedule hours, target hours, that you can add to reports for comparison or achievement of target, for example. So So things that I would challenge people to consider is if you have this target utilization set up, it's really nice to set up self-service dashboards. Things like, what's my target percentage-wise and hours-wise? Where am I at from timesheets? It'll help timesheet compliance. It'll help communication as to where people are at as far as achieving their goals. You can look at it quarterly, annually, weekly, whatever your metric is that drives information. And the example here are some self-service dashboards where this particular customer is dealing with not only direct billable hours, but something called credited hours or effective hours, which there's additional effort that's granted as utilized for metric measurement and potentially impacting comp because people are maybe doing sales calls or generating demos or building new products to resell, things that you would want to promote people doing in the organization. So speaking of dashboards, one of the challenges has always been somebody sets up these wonderful dashboards and then you're trying to get them out to everyone else. Okay, how can you do that? The bulk user wizard actually is the only way that you can sort of push dashboards out to other people. It is a feature called dashboard charts that you can copy the dashboards from one person out to multiple people. The thing to be aware of is the minute that you push the charts out, if the person has maybe 3 different chart tabs set up with charts on each of the tabs, first off, the people that you're pushing it out to have to have access to the reports, so you have to make sure you share the reports. And then they'll get all the tabs that are pushed out. So every tab that you push out will create tabs on the new people's dashboards as well. But once it's sort of a one and done. You push it out and you can't make any changes. If you make a mistake, you're like, oh crap, I need to send out this other chart version. You can't sort of redo the charts. If you push it again, you're going to duplicate everything you just pushed the first time. So now instead of 3 tabs, everyone has 6 tabs. And some of the tabs have the right data and some of the tabs have the wrong data. So certainly something to be aware of and something that you don't want to occur. But there is a way. There is a way if you want to continue to push more information out on a regular basis. If you need to push more charts out to people, my recommendation is basically use a single account, a user account, maybe it's your administrator, as the master. And let's say we already pushed 3 sets of charts out to everyone, so everyone's got these wonderful self-service reports, and you decide that you want to pass another set out, which is maybe holiday schedules or something like that. So pick one person to be the master and set only that chart up. Single tab, single chart, or multiple charts on that one tab. Just create one new tab and put those charts on it. When you have the charts the way you want, you can use the bulk user wizard, and what will happen is it'll push that one single tab and create just one more tab for everyone else. So it's a way to sort of control the setup so you can sort of build on everyone's charts. You do have to push things out in whole tabs in the system, but there is a way to sort of push additional dashboards out without causing too much duplication in the system. Okay. A caution here, so dashboards, I really I've always been a fan of the dashboards in OpenAir with the graphical changes that they've made. I do encourage sharing information, but the new feature that does sort of like dynamic report viewing, which is called portlets, those currently cannot be pushed by the bulk user wizard, so there's a limitation there. If you do have some portlets on your dashboard, you're not going to be able to include those as part of the push out to individuals. It's really just the graphs at this point in time. Okay. And finally, we're going to talk about audit. So I've talked about some of the fields. I'm certain you have a ton of custom fields probably on your user record, maybe type of user, hire date, contractor or not contractor. Those kind of fields, you'll update those. The ripple through on those custom fields will be reports, of course, because you're depending on reports. But there won't be any functionality associated with those custom fields because they're custom fields. So a thing to think about as far as making sure that you have all the fields that you have set up on the user records to be complete is to understand what you can do as far as auditing in the system to help your user administration. So there are 2 detailed reports that I always recommend customers have in place. One is related to license usage, and we'll talk about what that means in just a second. And the other is data completeness, which of course you can kind of gain. If you don't have all the fields set correctly on a user record, who knows what's going to ripple through as far as billing or reporting or compensation metrics or vacation balances, things like that. There could be a lot of misinformation being tracked in the system if the user isn't set up correctly. So I have a couple of reports that I recommend being set up, and then you can set those up to just email yourself daily, weekly, at least quarterly. Take a look at these type of audit reports to make sure that you have your users in a good state, all the data is updated and correct and accurate, and specifically to see if there's any users that you can inactivate because it's freeing up some licenses. So for example, the license usage audit that I always recommend is I include 3 fields besides the username. Okay, last login, which is pretty popular, but that doesn't tell the whole story. There are times where an entire user account can have nothing but time entered by someone by proxy. So timesheets are being entered, maybe they're being uploaded, maybe they're being proxied in by somebody. So you'll never see a last login, or maybe the last login is like 6 months ago. But if you include last time entry date, that's a pretty common usage for OpenAir is time entry. So last time entry date will give you a more accurate picture of when's the last time this person was involved in the OpenAir system. And finally, if you include last booking date, provided that you're using bookings for scheduling. If you're using assignments, it'd be last assignment date. This would tell you when people are expected to be used in the company or on a project. So no one's put this, the subcontractor hasn't put time in the system for 6 months, but we need them next week. So I wouldn't inactivate their record, because the worst thing that could happen is you inactivate their record and a week later you get an email saying, hey, I need to put timesheet in the system, can you reactivate me? So just using the scheduling process that you have in place, leave people active that are expected to be using the system in the near future. Because this is a detail user report, you can exclude people who are already inactive. And then I would also exclude users that you may have reserved for integration. So if you have integrations with Integration Manager or with like Salesforce or something, you can always, you may have a couple of users dedicated to that, which are not real people. So it's, just to prevent them accidentally getting inactivated, you can exclude them from the report. And what happens is when you get this report, take a look at it. Anyone that hasn't touched the system in 3 months is not expected to touch the system, has not put any time in the system, are probably a pretty good candidate to inactivate. For those of you who may not be aware, you purchase a number of licenses to use OpenAir. A license is anyone who is active. Okay? So if there are people that you can inactivate, you are freeing up licenses. So as you onboard new people, you don't have to go and buy new licenses all the time. Just inactivate the folks that don't need a license right now. This is something that you can use with subcontractors, of course. So a subcontractor that you may use periodically, you can inactivate and activate them as necessary to allow them access when they need to, and not just keep them active all the time. This is the cost savings. So if you can effectively manage your license purchases, you will in turn save the company some money. Now the data completeness is a little more complex. It's still a detailed field, but here the values that I put here on this slide are all the ones that I typically, if you're using all the functionality that we've talked about, including things like approval processes, by the way, which I didn't talk too much about. These are all key fields that you use to make sure users are set up correctly. So you would want, make sure that the role and the primary filter set at a minimum are set up correctly. They have access to the right permissions. They have access to see the right data, and everything else, making sure that that is accurate, especially this time of year as you're getting ready for the new fiscal year. So user administration actually is more than just updating fields. It's ways that you can save money for the company by managing your licenses, by making sure that you have accurate invoicing based on the job code access, support compliance and information awareness, benefit awareness as far as comp for utilization targets, PTO. So just be aware of just updating a field. You have probably a bigger realm of impact by just changing one field to a different value. So just keep in mind whenever there's a feature that you want to use in user administration, what the downstream effects are for updating that data, And if you want to use new features like entity tags, keep in mind how dynamic that data is so that you can ensure that you're keeping the data up to date. So as we wrap up here, I'm going to open up the phone lines and see if there's any questions in general regarding user administration, maybe something that you've tried to keep updated and you're having trouble with, or just any general questions on the OpenAir system. We'll open this up to an open forum now and see if there's anyone